Have you ever wondered, what is the government going to do about this inflation problem? And why aren't they addressing it more seriously? Well, in today's video, I'm going to go over the two options the Federal Reserve has and why they both suck. My name's Eric. This is Above My Pay Grade. Let's get into it. All right, guys, so option one. You probably saw that the Federal Reserve raised interest rates, but not by a lot, 0.25%. That's 1/4%. Now, these are the two options that are going through the Fed's head at this point. And I want you to think about it from an undercurrent of a currency crisis. We don't really have an inflation crisis. We have a problem with the currency. And I'm going to go over that here with you today. So option one, if the Fed wants to raise interest rates, they have to keep in mind that we have $30 trillion in debt. Every year we spend about $4 trillion and we take in about $3 trillion in tax receipts. Is that sustainable in your own life? No, it's not sustainable in the government either. But we pretend like it is, guarantee you it's not. So let's say they want to raise interest rates, which they did, 0.25%, which is essentially nothing. You typically have to raise interest rates to above inflation. So if inflation is at 10%, you have to have interest rates. That means the borrowing rate of money to 11% or more, which, by the way, when the Fed raises interest rates, it has a direct effect on what the government pays on its debt. This debt right here that we're taking out every year, that debt, the interest rate goes up if the Fed raises interest rates. So that's a problem. So let's say they raise interest rates. Once they do that, if they raise it enough, the economy is going to have a downturn. Why is the economy going to have a downturn? Because our economy is so levered. Every company, every person, everybody has a ton of debt. And if that debt, the borrowing cost on that debt goes up, then that means purchasing power goes down because people are spending more money to just service the debt, including the government. That's the big one, the government. So if the economy goes down, asset prices and the stock market and the housing market, I guarantee you this, is propped up by the Federal Reserve. But if these two things go down, a lot of people's purchasing power comes from how much money they've made on stocks and how much money they've made on their house. Wall Street Journal came out with an article the other day that said people made more money on their house in 2021 than they did at their job. That's a problem. So if asset prices go down, that eventually has an effect on jobs, which means jobs will go down, as in there will be less of them. And if there's less jobs, there's less tax revenue. If there's less tax revenue, deficit, meaning this number right here, goes up, which means the government's spending more on debt than they are on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, military, etc. So if the deficit goes up, government has to borrow more money to pay for all the things they promised, which causes more inflation, which means they have to raise interest rates again. Doom vortex number one doesn't sound very good to me. So let's go over option number dos. All right, guys, option number two. Let's say the Federal Reserve continues on the path they're on, which is not really raising interest rates in any meaningful way. So here's what's going to happen in doom vortex number dos, okay? So option two, the Federal Reserve does not raise interest rates. That will mean people continue to borrow because money is essentially free for banks. 0% interest rate. So they can loan out money and it's essentially a money printer for them. So borrowing is cheap, not only for individuals, but for governments. Now, what will this do to asset prices? You've seen it. Asset prices like homes and stocks go way up, which typically means there's more jobs, right? Which will mean tax revenue will go up because people are making more money. Here's the kicker, though, for the government. 60% of what we spend as a government are just dues, as in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all those 60% of the government's budget. That went up a significant portion in 2021 because of inflation. And they're a big-time voter base, so they're compensation has to keep up with inflation. So government costs, when things inflate, government costs go way up. So even if they're getting tax revenue that's increasing, I guarantee you this, it's not increasing enough to keep up with the increase in Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid that the government has to spend. So what happens again? The government borrows more money. Government borrows more money, which will cause inflation. And you'll notice here, this arrow is going through the roof. Why? Because inflation, if they do not raise interest rates above the rate of inflation, we will continue to have inflation. It might go down a little bit from 10% to 9%, but we're still going to have inflation. Here's the thing about this option. 100% not sustainable. This is not production of goods and services that are making asset prices grow. It is easy, free, cheap money. And again, if money is attached to labor, attached to productivity, asset prices going up for cheap money is not a recipe for success. And when all this comes crashing down, it's going to be a big, bloody mess. So what is the Federal Reserve trying to do by raising interest rates just a tiny little bit like they did last month, or this month rather? They are trying to thread this needle. They don't want to cause a depression by raising interest rates, which it will do. I guarantee you that. It will cause an economic depression. However, they have a massively huge problem on their hands, and that's inflation. So what they did in the 70s, look this up, is raise interest rates all the way to 15% to fight inflation. That means your home mortgage was 18 to 20%. What do you think that does to prices of assets? Way down. So this is what the Fed's trying to do, thread this needle. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. So what's the huge issue that the Fed's dealing with right now is our government debt. Our government debt. Our government debt is so enormous that the debt payment, if interest rates go up so high that tax receipts are going to pay 100% of just interest on debt, what are we doing here, right? It doesn't make any sense. So what's my advice to you? I highly recommend you do some research to get out of this dollar Ponzi scheme. I like Bitcoin. A lot of people like gold, like silver. I'm not a financial advisor. But this system, this dollar system of being able to print money and weaponize the dollar around the world, it will end in our lifetime. We don't have a lot of good options. And like I said at the beginning of the video, this isn't really an inflation crisis. This is a currency crisis. We have a problem with the dollar in the United States because we borrowed so much money. So people's faith in the dollar will obviously fall if the government can't pay their bills. Do you think a police officer is going to go to work if they don't get paid? People in the military? No. So the government is going to have to pay their bills. You think Social Security beneficiaries are going to vote for a politician who says we need to cut Social Security? Not going to happen. So my base case is the government's going to continue to spend, and borrow until people, the masses, lose faith in the dollar. So you're ahead of the curve right now. If you want to get out of the dollar system, I recommend doing some research yourself. All right, guys, this particular message today, I think is uber important to get out because a lot of your friends and family will start to think, hey, wait, you're a conspiracy theorist, right? You think this is going to happen, this is going to happen. It's called math. Look it up. You can't really argue with math. And we're in a spiral. One way or another, one's going to happen. A depression or runaway inflation. Both are bad news bears for the dollar. So, if you like this stuff and you think other people should know about it, please share, like, subscribe. See you in the next video.